The ship was called Starward Harmony, and it was the largest vessel Yuna had ever seen. It stretched for almost 2 kilometers from front to back, carrying over 3,000 beings from dozens of different species. There were diplomats and scientists, traders and soldiers, families and lone travelers, and then there was Yuna, the only human on board. She had been an ambassador for the Earth Coalition for 7 years now. In that time, she had visited 12 different planets, attended countless meetings, and shaken hands with creatures that had no hands at all. But this voyage was different. This was the first time humans had been invited to join the Galactic Peace Summit, and Yuna had been chosen to represent her entire species. The weight of that responsibility never left her shoulders. Yuna walked through the corridors of Deck 7, nodding politely at the other passengers she passed. A group of Tellurians, small blue creatures with 4 arms, hurried past her without making eye contact. 2 Morphins, beings made almost entirely of living crystal, stopped their conversation when she approached, and only resumed talking after she had passed. A single Korvath, tall and insect-like, actually changed direction to avoid walking near her. She was used to this by now. Humans were still new to the galaxy. First contact had happened less than 100 years ago. And in galactic terms, that was barely yesterday. Most species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Some had been doing it for millions. Humans were like children who had just learned to walk, stumbling into a room full of adults, and those adults did not know what to make of them. Yuna had read the reports. She knew what other species thought of humans. They called them the paradox species because nothing about them made sense. Humans were soft and weak, with no claws, no armor, no venom. They could not run very fast or see in the dark. They needed to sleep for 8 hours every day, which seemed like a terrible waste of time to species that only needed 2 or 3 hours of rest. But somehow, humans had survived. Somehow, they had climbed to the top of their food chain on a planet filled with predators. Somehow, they had built cities and ships and weapons that could destroy worlds. And somehow, despite being so fragile, they showed no fear. That was what disturbed other species the most. Humans did not act like prey. They walked with confidence. They looked larger predators in the eye. They smiled at creatures that could tear them apart in seconds. It was unnatural. It was unsettling. It made other species wonder what humans knew that they did not. Yuna reached her quarters and pressed her palm against the door panel. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and she stepped inside. Her room was small but comfortable, with a bed against one wall, a desk against another, and a tiny bathroom in the corner. A single window showed the stars outside, millions of points of light against the endless black. She sat down on her bed and let out a long breath. It had been a difficult day, 3 meetings, 2 official dinners, and countless small conversations where she had to explain, once again, that humans did not eat other sentient beings. She was tired, but she knew she would not sleep well. She never did. Out here among the stars, her tablet beeped. A message had arrived. Yuna picked it up and read the words on the screen. It was a reminder from the ship's security office. All passengers were instructed to stay away from Deck 12. That was where the Valorans were staying, and the Valorans did not welcome visitors. Yuna had heard stories about the Valorans. Everyone had. They were the most feared species in the galaxy, apex predators who had evolved on a death world even more dangerous than Earth. They stood over 2 meters tall, with silver-blue fur that could change color to match their surroundings. Their claws could cut through metal. Their teeth could crush bone. Their eyes glowed in the dark like dying stars. For centuries, the Valorans had been warriors. They had conquered dozens of systems, destroyed entire fleets, and earned a reputation for violence that made other species tremble. It was only in the last few generations that they had started to seek peace, and even now, many in the galaxy did not trust them. The Galactic Coalition had invited them to the Peace Summit as a gesture of goodwill. A Valoran High Warrior named Sereth had come aboard with her 3 cubs, representing her people's desire for a new beginning, but the other passengers kept their distance. The Valorans were given an entire deck to themselves, with guards posted at every entrance. Yuna stared at the message for a long moment. She had never met a Valoran. Part of her was curious, part of her was afraid, but mostly, she just felt sad. Here they were, traveling through the stars together, and still they could not share the same space without fear. She put down the tablet and walked to her window. Outside, a nebula glowed purple and gold. Clouds of gas and dust where new stars were being born. It was beautiful beyond words, and it made her feel very small. Back on Earth, Yuna had grown up on a farm in a small village. Her parents had raised animals, and she had spent her childhood surrounded by creatures that could have hurt her if they wanted to. Horses that could kick, dogs that could bite, bulls that could crush her against a fence. But they never did. She had learned to move slowly, speak softly, and earn their trust. Her grandfather used to say that all creatures wanted the same things: safety, food, and a place to belong. Even the dangerous ones. Especially the dangerous ones. The animals that could hurt you the most were often the ones that had been hurt themselves. Yuna wondered if that was true of the Valorans too. She shook her head and turned away from the window. It was late, and she had another long day tomorrow. She changed into her sleeping clothes, brushed her teeth, and climbed into bed. The ship hummed softly around her. Engines and life support systems working together to keep everyone alive. She picked up an old book from her bedside table. It was a real paper book, printed on Earth. One of the few things she had brought from home. She read for a while, letting the familiar words calm her mind. Then she put the book down, turned off the light, and closed her eyes. Her heartbeat was slow and steady in her chest. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. It was the same rhythm that had kept humans alive for millions of years, through ice ages and predators and diseases. It was patient and strong, like a drum that never stopped playing. Yuna did not know that somewhere on Deck 12, 3 small ears were listening to that sound. She did not know that 3 pairs of glowing eyes were open in the darkness, drawn to a rhythm they could not understand but could not ignore. She did not know that her heartbeat was about to change everything, but she would learn. Very soon, she would learn. Deck 12 was dark and quiet. The Valorans preferred it that way. Their eyes could see perfectly in low light, and the darkness reminded them of their home world, where thick clouds blocked most of the sun. The other species on the ship thought the Valorans kept their deck dark because they were hiding something dangerous. The truth was much simpler. They just liked it better. In the largest room on the deck, 3 young Valorans were supposed to be sleeping. Their mother, High Warrior Sereth, had left hours ago for another meeting with the ship's captain. She had told them to stay in bed, to behave, and to not cause any trouble. She had said this very clearly, in a voice that left no room for argument. But Kira, the eldest of the 3 cubs, was not very good at following rules. She lay on her sleeping pad, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Next to her, her brother Talon was tossing and turning, unable to find a comfortable position. And in the corner, their youngest sibling Bryn was curled into a tight ball, making small whimpering sounds in his sleep. Bryn was only 4 cycles old, still a baby by Valoran standards. He had been having nightmares ever since they left their homeworld. Kira did not know what he dreamed about, but she could guess. The same things that haunted her own sleep: fire and screaming, the smell of burning fur, the sound of their father's voice, calling out to them before everything went silent. Their father had died in the last war, 3 cycles ago. He had been a warrior, like their mother. He had fought to protect their people, and he had paid the price. Sereth never talked about it. She just worked harder, trained longer, and pushed herself until there was no room left for grief. But the cubs remembered. They would always remember. Kira sat up slowly, careful not to make any noise. The guards outside their door were Korvath soldiers, hired by the ship to watch over the Valoran quarters. They were good at their jobs, but they were not Valorans. They did not have the hearing of a predator. They did not have the instincts. She had been planning this escape for days. It had started with a sound. A strange rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere far away, traveling through the walls of the ship like a whisper. At first, Kira thought she was imagining it. Then she noticed that Talon could hear it too. And then Bryn started crying less at night, turning his head toward the sound as if it was calling to him. Thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. It was a heartbeat. But it was not like any heartbeat Kira had ever heard. Valoran hearts beat fast and hard, like the drums their warriors played before battle. This sound was different. It was slow, calm, patient. It made something inside Kira feel warm and safe, and she did not understand why. She had to find it. She had to know what creature could make such a sound. Kira crept across the room and nudged Talon with her paw. He woke instantly, as all Valorans did, and looked at her with questioning eyes. She put one claw to her lips, the universal sign for silence, and pointed toward the ventilation shaft in the corner of the room. Talon understood. He had been watching the engineers work on those shafts for weeks, memorizing the codes they used to open the panels. Vyloran cubs were curious by nature, and they learned quickly. It was one of the reasons their species had survived for so long. Together, they woke Bryn. The little cub blinked sleepily and started to make a sound. But Kira covered his mouth gently with her paw. She pointed at the shaft, then at herself, then made a walking motion with her claws. Bryn's eyes went wide with excitement. He had never been on an adventure before. Talon moved to the ventilation panel and entered the code he had memorized. The panel slid open without a sound. Cool air flowed out, carrying the smells of the ship, metal, and recycled oxygen, and 1,000 different species all breathing together. Kira went first. She pulled herself into the shaft, her claws finding grip on the smooth metal walls. Behind her, Talon helped Bryn climb up, then followed himself. The shaft was narrow, but Valoran cubs were built for tight spaces. On their homeworld, they had to learn to hide from larger predators before they were strong enough to fight. They moved in complete silence. This was not something they had to learn. It was something they were born knowing. Their paws made no sound against the metal. Their breathing was slow and controlled. Even little Bryn, who usually made noise about everything, understood that this was serious. The shaft branched in many directions, but Kira always knew which way to go. She followed the sound, that slow heartbeat that called to her like a song. It grew louder as they moved through the ship, passing above rooms filled with sleeping passengers, through corridors watched by security cameras, past sealed doors and locked hatches. They passed over Deck 10, where the Tellurians slept in their water tanks. They passed over Deck 9, where the Morphins charged themselves with energy from the ship's power grid. They passed over Deck 8, where the Korvath guards sat at their monitoring stations, completely unaware that 3 predator cubs were crawling above their heads. And finally, they reached Deck 7. The heartbeat was very loud now. Kira could feel it in her chest, mixing with her own rapid pulse. It was coming from a room just below them, a small set of quarters on the far end of the corridor. She found a panel and pushed it open, peering down into the hallway. It was empty. The lights were dimmed for the night cycle, casting everything in a soft blue glow. Kira dropped down silently, then helped her brothers climb out of the shaft. They stood together in the corridor, 3 small shapes in the darkness. Their fur was silver blue, almost invisible against the walls. Their eyes glowed faintly, like distant moons. Bryn pulled at Kira's paw and pointed at a door. The sound was coming from there. Thump, 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 thump. So slow, so calm, so different from everything they had ever known. Kira walked toward the door. She had watched the engineers use these doors many times. She knew the panel on the side controlled the lock. She extended one claw and carefully pressed the override sequence that she had seen a maintenance worker use the day before. The door slid open. The room inside was small and dark, lit only by the light of stars through a single window. There was a bed against the wall, and on that bed lay a creature unlike any Kira had ever seen. It was soft and pink, with no fur except for a dark patch on its head. It had no claws, no fangs, no armor. It was small and fragile, like something that should have been eaten long ago. But it was not dead. It was sleeping peacefully. A book resting on its chest. Its mouth slightly open, and its heart was beating. Thump, 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 thump. Kira stood in the doorway, frozen. Behind her, Talon and Bryn stared with wide eyes. None of them moved. None of them made a sound. This was the creature. This small, soft, defenseless thing. This was the source of the sound that had called to them across the entire ship. Bryn took a step forward, then another. He was moving before Kira could stop him, drawn by something he could not name or understand. He walked across the room on silent pause, climbed onto the bed, and pressed his ear against the creature's chest. The heartbeat filled his whole world. Slow and steady, patient and strong. It was the most beautiful sound Bryn had ever heard. He closed his eyes and began to purr. Yuna woke to the feeling of weight on her chest. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. She had been having a strange dream. Something about her grandfather's farm and the horses that used to sleep standing up in the barn. But the weight was real. It was warm and heavy, pressing against her ribs, and it was making a sound, a rumbling, vibrating sound, like a motor running deep inside something soft. She opened her eyes. A face was looking back at her. It was small and covered in silver-blue fur. It had pointed ears and a black nose, and two eyes that glowed like golden lamps in the darkness. It was the face of a predator, a creature built for hunting and killing, and it was less than a foot away from her own. Yuna's heart jumped. She felt her body tense, every muscle preparing to run or fight. This was the response that had kept humans alive for millions of years, the ancient fear that lived in their blood. But she did not move. She did not scream, she just lay there, staring at the creature on her chest, trying to understand what she was seeing. It was a cub, a baby. Its eyes were too big for its face, and its ears twitched nervously. And its paws were pressed against her shirt like it was holding on to something precious. It was a Violaran, one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and it was purring. Two more shapes moved in the darkness. Yuna turned her head very slowly and saw them standing by the door. Two more cubs, slightly bigger than the first, watching her with careful eyes. They did not look angry or hungry. They looked curious and a little bit scared. Yuna's fear began to fade. It was replaced by something else. Something that felt a lot like wonder. She had raised animals on the farm. She had seen newborn calves take their first steps. She had watched puppies open their eyes for the first time. She had held kittens in her hands and felt them purr against her skin. This was not so different. These were children. Strange and dangerous, yes, but still children. They had come to her room in the middle of the night, and instead of attacking her, they were purring. Why? The smallest cub pressed its ear harder against her chest. Yuna suddenly understood. It was listening to her heartbeat. That slow, steady rhythm that she had never thought much about. Thump, 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 thump. Thump, thump. To her, it was just background noise, the sound of being alive. But to this little creature, it seemed to mean something more. Yuna made a decision. It was probably a stupid decision, the kind that got people killed in the stories she used to read. But she made it anyway. She lifted her hand very slowly and placed it on the cub's head. The fur was softer than she expected. It felt like silk under her fingers, warm and smooth. The cub froze for a moment, its purring stopping. Yuna held her breath. Then the cub pushed its head against her palm, like a cat asking to be petted. And the purring started again, even louder than before. The other two cubs moved closer. The middle one, slightly larger than the smallest, climbed onto the bed and settled against Yuna's side. Its weight was solid and warm, and it made a small sound of contentment as it pressed against her. The largest cub hesitated at the edge of the bed, watching with those glowing eyes, clearly wanting to join but not sure if it was allowed. Yuna smiled. She could not help it. She reached out her other hand and patted the space beside her. The largest cub jumped onto the bed and curled up against her legs. It was heavier than she expected, probably about 40 pounds, and its claws were very close to her feet. But it did not scratch her, it just lay there, breathing slowly, its eyes beginning to close. Yuna lay in the darkness, surrounded by 3 predator cubs, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt at peace. On the farm, there had been a dog. His name was Bada, and he had been old, and tired, and scared of storms. Whenever thunder rolled across the sky, Bada would find Yuna and press himself against her, shaking and whimpering until the storm passed. She would hold him and talk to him softly, and eventually he would calm down. Her heartbeat always seemed to help. She wondered if these cubs had been through a storm of their own. Time passed. Yuna did not know how much. The ship was quiet around them. 3,000 beings sleeping under the light of distant stars. The cubs breathed in rhythm with her heart, their small bodies rising and falling with each beat. The purring grew softer as they fell deeper into sleep. Yuna stayed awake. She did not want to move and disturb them. And part of her, a small part that she would never admit to anyone, did not want this moment to end. She thought about what would happen when someone found them. The cubs had clearly escaped from Deck 12, which meant they had gotten past guards and security systems and locked doors. Their mother would be looking for them. The ship's security would be looking for them. When they found her room, when they saw what had happened, there would be questions, maybe anger, maybe worse, but Yuna could not make herself feel afraid. These were just children. Lost and lonely children who had found their way to her door and fallen asleep listening to her heart. Whatever consequences came, she would face them. She had faced worse. The smallest cub shifted in its sleep, making a soft sound. Its paw twitched, chasing something in a dream. Yuna stroked its head gently, and it settled down again, purring softly. She wondered what it was dreaming about. She wondered what had brought it here, across half the ship, to a human's room. She wondered what it had heard in her heartbeat that made it feel safe enough to sleep. Humans had been asking questions like this for as long as they existed. Why did animals trust them? Why did wolves become dogs? Why did cats choose to live in human homes? Why did horses let humans ride on their backs? Scientists had theories about evolution and mutual benefit and survival advantages. But Yuna's grandfather had a different answer. He used to say that humans had a gift. Not claws or fangs or speed or strength. Something simpler. Something deeper. Humans knew how to make other creatures feel safe. It was in their blood, in their bones, in the slow and steady rhythm of their hearts. They had survived not by being the strongest, but by being the most comforting. Yuna had never understood what he meant. But lying here in the darkness, with 3 alien predators sleeping peacefully in her arms, she was starting to. The largest cub stirred and opened its eyes. For a moment, it looked at Yuna with something like surprise, as if it had forgotten where it was. Then it remembered. It looked at its siblings, both still sleeping soundly. It looked at Yuna's hand, still resting on the smallest cub's head. And then, very slowly, it moved closer and put its own head under Yuna's arm. Yuna felt tears in her eyes. She did not know why. She just knew that something important was happening. Something that went beyond species and fear, and all the walls that creatures built between themselves. She held the cubs close and listened to them breathe. Outside the window, the nebula glowed purple and gold. Clouds of gas and dust where new stars were being born. And inside the small room on Deck 7, a human and 3 predators slept together, their hearts beating as one. The night continued on. The ship flew through the darkness of space, and somewhere on Deck 12, a mother woke to find her children gone. Tejo had been a soldier for 20 years before he became a security chief. He had served in the Earth Defense Force, fought in 2 border conflicts, and earned more medals than he liked to talk about. He had seen things that still kept him awake at night. He had made decisions that he would carry with him forever, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. He stood in the security center on Deck 5, staring at the monitors in front of him. Around him, his team was working frantically, checking cameras and scanning corridors and sending out search parties. The alarms were flashing red, and the ship's AI was announcing an emergency lockdown in its calm, mechanical voice. 3 Valoran cubs were missing. The call had come 20 minutes ago from Deck 12. High Warrior Sarath had returned to her quarters after a late meeting and found her children gone. The guards outside the door swore they had not seen anything. The door had never opened, but the cubs were not in their beds, not in the bathroom, not anywhere in the room. They had vanished like ghosts. Tejo rubbed his eyes and tried to think. He had dealt with missing children before, on stations and ships and even on a few planets. Usually, they were hiding somewhere nearby, playing a game or running from a punishment they did not want to face. But these were not ordinary children. These were Valorans, born predators, hunters by blood and bone. If they wanted to disappear, they could. And if something had happened to them, if some crew member had panicked and hurt them, or if they had found their way into a dangerous part of the ship, the consequences would be beyond terrible. The Valorans would not just be angry, they would see it as an act of war. Tejo had read the history files. He knew what happened when Valorans went to war. A young officer ran up to him, breathing hard. Her name was Jimin, and she was one of his best people. Calm under pressure, and smart enough to solve problems before they became disasters. "Chief, we found something," she said. Ventilation shaft in the Valoran quarters. The panel was opened from the inside. They went through the ducts. Tejo nodded grimly. Of course they had. Predator instincts. Small spaces. Silent movement. The cubs had probably been planning this for days, watching and learning and waiting for the right moment. "Can you track them?" he asked. Jimin shook her head. "The motion sensors in the shafts are too basic. They only detect objects larger than a certain size, and the cubs are small. But based on the airflow patterns, they could have traveled anywhere on the ship. Anywhere. 3,000 passengers. Hundreds of rooms. Dozens of decks." Tejo felt a headache building behind his eyes. The door to the security center burst open, and High Warrior Sarath walked in. She was the tallest Valoran Tejo had ever seen, almost 2.5 meters of muscle and fur, and barely controlled rage. Her eyes blazed like fire in the dim light of the security center. Her claws were fully extended, each one as long as a human finger and sharp enough to cut through steel. Everyone in the room stopped moving. Some of them stopped breathing. "Where are my children?" Sarath asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was death in every word. Tejo stepped forward. He was not afraid of her. Exactly. Fear was something he had learned to put aside long ago. But he was very, very careful. "We are searching the entire ship, High Warrior," he said. "We believe they used the ventilation system to travel. We will find them." Sarath stared at him for a long moment. Tejo could feel her judging him, measuring him, deciding whether he was someone who could be trusted or someone who needed to be eliminated. He kept his face calm and his breathing steady. He had faced down worse things than angry mothers. Finally, Sarath nodded. "I will search as well. My nose is better than your machines." Har. She turned and walked out of the security center without waiting for permission. Tejo watched her go, then looked at Jimin. "Go with her," he said. "Do not get in her way. Just make sure she does not kill anyone." Jimin nodded and ran after the Valoran. Tejo turned back to the monitors. Something was bothering him, a pattern he could not quite see. The cubs had left their room and traveled through the ship, past guards and cameras and sensors, but they had not left the ship. They had not tried to reach the escape pods or the shuttle bay. They had not gone anywhere dangerous. They had gone somewhere specific. They had a destination in mind. But where? He pulled up a map of the ship and began to trace possible routes through the ventilation system. If he was a small predator, where would he go? What would he be looking for? Then it hit him. The cubs were not running away. They were not lost. They were hunting, looking for something, following some signal that only they could hear. Tejo had seen animals do this on Earth. Dogs following a scent for kilometers. Cats traveling across entire countries to find their way home. Birds navigating by the stars. Animals had senses that humans could not understand, instincts that defied explanation. What if the cubs had heard something? What if they had followed a sound through the ship, a sound that no one else could detect? He started checking the audio logs from different sections of the ship. Most of them were just background noise, the hum of engines and the chatter of passengers. But then he found something interesting. On Deck 7, in one of the smaller quarters, there was a repeating sound, soft and rhythmic, slow and steady, a heartbeat. Tejo zoomed in on the location, room 742. He checked the passenger manifest. Human quarters. Ambassador Yuna. His blood went cold. He grabbed his communication device and called Sereth directly. "Hi, warrior. I think I know where they are." Deck 7. Room 742. The human ambassador's quarters. There was silence on the other end. Then Serath's voice came through, hard as stone. "If she has hurt them, I will destroy her." "She might not even know they are there," Tejo said quickly. "Please, let me handle this. Let me talk to her first." Another silence. Then, "You have 5 minutes." Tejo ran. He had never moved so fast in his life. Through corridors and downstairs, and past confused passengers who jumped out of his way. His heart was pounding. His lungs were burning, but he did not slow down. 5 minutes. He had 5 minutes before Serath arrived. And if she found the cubs hurt, nothing would stop her. He reached Deck 7 and sprinted toward room 742. Serath was already there, standing in front of the door with her claws ready. Jimin stood beside her, looking terrified. "Wait," Tejo gasped. "Please, just wait." Serath did not move. Her eyes were fixed on the door. Tejo pressed the panel to request entry. The door slid open, and he saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The human ambassador was sitting on her bed, wide awake, her eyes calm and steady. 3 Valoran cubs were curled around her like sleeping cats. One was pressed against her chest, its ear over her heart. 2 others were nestled against her sides, their small bodies rising and falling with peaceful breaths, and they were purring. Tejo had never heard that sound before. It was deep and warm, like distant thunder, like the rumble of mountains settling into the earth. It was the sound of safety, the sound of trust. Sereth pushed past him and stepped into the room. Her claws were still extended, her body still tense with rage. But then she stopped. She heard the purring. She saw her children's faces, relaxed and peaceful, dreaming sweet dreams. "They came on their own," Yuna whispered. "I did not want to wake them." Sereth stared at her. The rage in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something else, something that looked almost like wonder. "How?" she asked. Yuna shook her head. "I do not know. They came to my door in the night. They listened to my heartbeat. And then they fell asleep." Sereth looked at her children. Then, she looked at the human. And slowly, very slowly, she retracted her claws. "Do not move," she said quietly. "Let them sleep." Then she sat down on the floor of the human's room, wrapped her arms around her knees, and watched her cubs dream. The cubs slept until morning. Yuna stayed with them the entire time, barely moving, her hand resting gently on Bryn's head. Serath sat on the floor, silent and watchful, her golden eyes never leaving her children. Tejo stood by the door, turning away anyone who came to investigate. The news had spread through the ship, but he kept the crowds away. This moment was private. This moment was sacred. When the first cub finally stirred, it was Kira, the eldest. She opened her eyes, blinked in the soft morning light, and saw her mother sitting beside the bed. For a moment, she looked scared. She had broken the rules. She had left their quarters without permission. She expected punishment, but Sereth just reached out and touched her daughter's face gently. "Why did you come here?" she asked. Her voice was soft, softer than Yuna had ever heard a Valoran speak. Kira looked down at the human beneath her. "I heard something," she said. "A sound. It was different from anything I had ever heard. It made me feel safe. Safe. Her heartbeat, Sareth said. It was not a question. Kira nodded. It is so slow. So calm. Like nothing bad could ever happen. I wanted to find it. I wanted to be close to it. Talon woke up next. And then little Bryn, who made a small sound of protest when he realized the heartbeat was not as loud as before. Una smiled and placed his ear back against her chest, and he settled down immediately, closing his eyes again with a happy purr. Sareth watched this with an expression that Una could not read. Then she stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. On our home world, she said, there are no creatures like you. Everything is a predator or prey. Everything fights or runs. We do not have gentleness. We do not understand it. Una sat up carefully, holding Bryn against her shoulder like a human baby. We have predators on Earth too, she said. Many of them. For most of our history, we were prey. We were hunted by things with bigger teeth and sharper claws. Sareth turned to look at her. And yet you survived. We did more than survive, Una said. We learned. We watched the predators, and we understood them. We learned that they were not evil. They were just hungry, or scared, or protecting their young, and when we understood them, we stopped being afraid. You tamed them, Sareth said. Some of them. The wolves became our partners. They hunted with us, protected us, slept beside our fires. We gave them food and shelter, and they gave us loyalty. They learned to trust us, and we learned to love them. Bryn made a soft sound against Una's shoulder. She rubbed his back gently, and he purred. Your heartbeat, Sareth said slowly. It is different from ours. Slower, steadier. Why? Una thought about this for a moment. Humans are not built for speed or strength. We cannot run as fast as other animals or fight as well. But we can do something else. We can wait. We can be patient. We can sit beside a frightened animal for hours, for days, until it learns that we mean no harm. She looked down at the cubs curled around her. Our hearts beat slowly because we do not need to run. We survive by being calm when everything else is afraid. Only, Sareth was quiet for a long time. The other cubs had woken up now and were watching their mother with curious eyes. They had never seen her like this, so still and thoughtful. Finally, Sareth spoke again. My mate died in the last war. 3 cycles ago. He was a warrior, like me. He fought to protect our people. Una felt her heart ache with sudden sympathy. I am sorry. The cubs were very young. They do not remember him well. But they remember the fear. They remember the night when I came home with blood on my claws and tears in my eyes. They have not slept well since. Sareth turned away from the window and walked to the bed. She sat down beside Una, close enough to touch but not quite touching. When I found them here, with you, I was ready to kill. I thought you had stolen them. I thought you had hurt them. But then I heard them purring. Her voice cracked slightly. I have not heard them purr like that since their father was alive. Una did not know what to say. She just sat there, holding Bryn, feeling the warmth of the other cubs against her sides. How do you do it? Sareth asked. How do you make them feel safe, when you are so small and weak? When you have no claws, no fangs, no armor? How can something so fragile be so comforting? Una smiled sadly. I do not know. I never understood it myself. My grandfather used to say that humans have a gift. Not strength or speed, but something else. Something in our hearts. She placed her hand over her chest, where her heart was beating its slow, steady rhythm. Maybe it is because we know what it feels like to be afraid. We have been prey for so long that we understand fear better than anyone. And when you understand fear, you can help others overcome it. Sareth reached out and touched Una's hand. Her claws were retracted, her touch surprisingly gentle. My cubs chose you, she said. Out of all the creatures on this ship, they found their way to you. They trusted you with their lives while they slept. She paused, and her golden eyes met Yuna's dark ones. Among my people. That means something. What does it mean? Yuna asked. It means you are family now. The news of what happened spread through the ship within hours. By the next day, it had been transmitted to every station and planet in the coalition. The story of the human ambassador and the Vialoran cubs became famous across the galaxy. Scientists studied human biology with new interest, trying to understand why their heartbeat had such an effect on other species. Diplomats requested human ambassadors for difficult negotiations, hoping their calming presence would help. And on dozens of worlds, people began to see humans differently. Not as the strange and confusing newcomers, but as something rare and valuable. The Valorans were affected most of all. For centuries, they had been feared. Other species avoided them, expecting violence and aggression. But the story of Serath's cubs changed everything. If a human could soothe predator children to sleep with nothing but her heartbeat, then maybe the galaxy was not as dangerous as they had believed. Maybe there was room for gentleness, even among the stars. 3 months later, when the peace summit finally concluded, Serath stood before the assembled representatives of 100 worlds and made an announcement. I name Yuna of Earth as godmother to my children, she said. The first human to receive this honor from any Valoran clan. She showed my cubs that there are things in the universe worth trusting. She showed them that strength is not always measured in claws and fangs. Sometimes, the strongest thing in the room is a steady heartbeat. Yuna stood beside her, overwhelmed and humbled. Kira held her left hand. Talon held her right, and little Bryn sat on her shoulders, purring softly, his ear pressed against her neck where he could feel the pulse of her blood. The audience applauded. For the first time in galactic history, 100 species clapped together for a human. Later that night, Yuna sat alone in her quarters, looking out at the stars. The summit was over. Tomorrow, she would return to Earth and report to her government. She would tell them about the treaties that had been signed, the alliances that had been formed, the progress that had been made toward peace. But she would also tell them something else, something more important. She would tell them that humanity had finally found its place among the stars, not as warriors or conquerors, not as scientists or traders, but as something simpler and more profound. Comforters, healers, the ones who could make even predators feel safe. Her grandfather had been right all along. Humans had a gift, and now the whole galaxy knew it. Yuna smiled and closed her eyes. Her heartbeat was slow and steady, as it had always been. Thump, 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 and somewhere across the stars, 3 young Valorans were falling asleep to that same rhythm, dreaming of the soft human who had taught them that the universe was not only filled with things to hunt, sometimes it held things worth loving.